Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Steve, and thinking of. It is strange for me to talk about Etel in public. So I would have shown an image, one of the pages of our image book called Zikr, that was made in 1995, but I can't, so you have to imagine it. It has the word Allah written over many, many times, and there are hands and colors, and it comes in 10 little pages that fold. I've known Etel since 1995 in Berkeley and Sausalito, and then in Paris and Rabat in Morocco, where she had a past, herself and many friends, artists, writers, philosophers, but also artisans. And she had written a book on traditional arts and wood carving that she gave me once upon a time. We shared the world and we saw each other in Morocco many times, as well as here and in other places in Paris. She had been a friend, a pole, a mountain, an interlocutor, a reader, a counselor, a lover of life who always dared to think death, violence, and distraction, and thinking, it's an important word for her. In 2016, once that I visited them in Paris, Etel gave me the DVD of her film Motion that she had completed in 2012, shot in New York and in Marin County with a Super 8 camera over the years between the late 1970s and 1989 in the mode of a visual diary, a cinematic sketchbook. She said, "It is slow, nothing happens in it, a sort of meditation." And she said to watch it at a time when I could give it concentrated attention. It was a lesson in looking, transcending, her words, any notion of ordinary time. A gift that remained for me as an impression, an imprint. I watched it again on the day of her death to feel her passing through the images in her unique way of being as seeing, the special kind of witnessing that she called perceiving. The light, the water, and the clouds, the buildings, and of course, the sun. Moments, scenes where she and we with her live ourselves and become that vision, that light, that water, that mountain, that sun that expands and returns to a point in the sky. A mystery of withdrawal and disclosure, a showing to which she sometimes alluded in the words of Ibn Arabi, the Muslim mystic. Al-Khayal al-Munfasil, the autonomous imagination, imagination independent of the viewer and of human perspective, where seeing is not the action of a human subject, but the passion of becoming world of a lover. In the few minutes that we have here, I want to show a short segment from her film and reflect on the nature of its meditation, what she called a meditation. The way it is related to Etel's capacity to see and to hear in the strong Quranic, I put it in parentheses, sense of listening and seeing with the heart, a sense that we may call witnessing in Arabic shuhud, the way it touched me, touching in the sense of carving, of making an impression. Quote, "Vision is the fainting of the eye on the object. Perception is a laser beam which destroys in order to assimilate. It is an exchange of energies," Journeys to Mount Tamalpais, page 37. This is from the film, I will show it in a second. 3 tall industrial chimneys sending white smoke into the sky, an airplane, a boat, boats, the white-gray waters of the Hudson River, the shimmer in the sunlight. The boats draw lines, sailboats, Mount Tamalpais from the bay, green becomes blue as a vision of the night, a vision from afar and above, the sight of the condor, becoming bird. The condor is dying from Journey. The glass surface of skyscrapers, giant mirrors refracting light. From close-up, they morph into water, construction sites, machines, modern mythological beings. Light in the passage in between buildings creates shapes that multiply and contain worlds. Water mirrored onto glass surfaces, bridges, ships, yellow and red cards, filmed from above and reflected and refracted onto glass buildings, the sea and the sky, the metallic light of the moon appearing and disappearing behind clouds as thick as layers of gray paint. Birds flying, a cat playing, the forest, the river, the recurring pyramidal shape of Mount Tamalpais, a cosmic sign, a pole that returns in her drawings that are in fact cosmic maps. She calls them motifs that transmute in the tapestry of the visual composition and return as refrain in a musical score, sometimes echoed by fragments of a Munir Bashir's maqam. This is not a representation of the world, but the world itself as material spiritual reality. Geographical landscapes can become spiritual concepts from Journey. A cosmic, sometimes apocalyptic landscape seen as recorded by non-human witness, a vision from the other side of life. The motif of the sun, its ideogrammatic writing, it tells signs, circles and square expanding and spilling into the black-colored sky, opening and closing of the camera. My face has become the camera. My right eye merges with colors, the other gets lost in infinity. Page 55, but there is no possession of colors, only acceptance of its reality. And if there is no possibility of possession of color, there is no possession at all, or whatever it is. This is still her, I'm quoting her. Do colors have the power to break the time barrier and carry us into outer space, not only those of miles of distance, but those of accumulated experiences of life since its beginning and unbeginning? We are moving in our experiments towards the sacredness of images. We are understanding images to be our equals, having life and power of their own. We make them, but they are not ours, and they are not from us. In a painting, you may be bringing down an angel. End of quote. What is vision? I'm not quoting her anymore. What is vision? The dream awakens. The heedless and the ones who can't see and can't hear. Their loneliness. Her determined gesture for us, read the signs. Remember. Dhikr, quote, I remember orange-colored mountains worshipped silently by dissident tribes, end of quote. Dhikr, the remembrance of God in the world, in its transmutations, turns and returns, learning to see, to dream, to experience, to perceive, to think. And her image book, Dhikr, quote, I always thought that dreaming was the honor of the human species. The logic of dreams is superior to the one we exercise while awake. In dreams, the mind at last finds its courage. It dares what we do not dare. It also creates. From nightmares to fantastic calculations, and it perceives reality beyond fuzzy interpretations. So what is vision? We can think of Arabic words from the Quran and from poetry, ayah, ibra, bayan, ayah, a verse, or an image, a presentation in the Quran, ibra, a lesson, an expression, bayan, a manifestation, language. But she writes in English and French and rarely uses an explicit Quranic vocabulary. She writes Arabic script in zikr, but just the name of God, and in her visual transcriptions on contemporary Arab poets. But otherwise, she generates her own graphic signs. In her beautiful essay on perception, Simone Fattal speaks of those images as iconas, or we may say disclosures of divine existence in the world of imagination, in Alam al-Khayal. Jalal Tawfiq, in a text that he wrote on Etel Adnan, contrasts the sense of apocalypse in the Arab apocalypse as withdrawal, with the sense of apocalypse as revelation and resurrection. He says that while the surpassing disaster, the war, and he talks about the context in which Etel was writing, has produced what he calls a withdrawal of Arab tradition, apocalypse as revelation, in the words of Etel Adnan, which he calls the greatest work of poetry, Arab poetry of the 20th century, written in a language which is not Arab. But in the Arab world, women do not read Arabic. Lots of old women do not read Arabic. They will be able to read the signs. He says that kind of reading is a reading that instead is opened up as the possibility of another apocalypse, one that is revelation. And for Etel, we may be able. We were talking. I also was thinking of the introduction to and the heart of another country. That the being outside, the being kharaj, the being outside, the being expelled, the being exiled, but also the being distant, like the condor who is flying from above, is a position that allows a familiarity with al-ghaiba, with the invisible. And Jalal Tawfiq continues that a vertiginous extension of the Arab tradition is made possible by the foreign language in the sense of foreign, in the sense of outside, not in the sense of English or French, which comes then in the sense in which then Arab tradition comes to include the Hopi healer and the Bodhisattva and the mad, the ones who Etel says are talking by themselves in the streets of modern cities. You perceive, and now I'm quoting her, you perceive noise and dirt, poverty, and the loneliness of those who are blind with so many things. Motion is a version of her paintings, the film, of life, or vice versa, to see in order to paint in order to see, her words. We recognize the shapes, the colors, the red squares, concentrates of vital and deathly energy, the surfaces, the abstract landscapes, abstracted, drawn into another world, drawn into the world of Mita Amtila, into the world of images. Filmed approximately during the same period, motion is intimately related to both Journeys to Mount Tamalpais, her statement on perception, painting, reality, and dreaming, and to The Arab Apocalypse that was originally published in French in 1980, written as an otherworldly witness to the Lebanese civil war, the massacre in the Palestinian refugee camp of Tal Zatar in 1976, and in the Muslim district of Karantina, and the war and destruction in general, from Babylon to the Aztec civilization, all the way to modern colonial and post-colonial wars fought all the way to the moon. I wanted to say, a son, through a little book, and the boy came and took the poem, she says. Her joy for life was also her capacity not to turn away from distraction, historical, political, intimate, cosmic. The sun and its demons of distraction, witnessing history, violence, death as part of her dhikr, an unspeakable hope nested in the work of ruination itself. And that is the unspeakable hope. It's a phrase from the Algerian writer Kateb Yassine, who for me echoes in certain ways Etel's work. This is what Ibn Khaldun, the philosopher of history, the 14th century philosopher of history, considered the ethical task of the historian, at once bearing witness to social and political life as seized from the historical time of catastrophe, and reading the events as signs and lessons, ibra, ebar, disclosures of non-human time. In their stories, there is a lesson for those who are endowed with insight. Quran 12, 111. Painting landscapes is creating cosmic events. The actual space of a painting, its very dimensions, is a space of memory. Remembrance of the layers of history, of the disappeared, the vanquished, imprisoned into the cycles of destruction. Quote, "One October night I dreamt that the whole mountain was made of glass, a thick greenish glass with long and rusty streak of kelp within it. I was lying over it, looking in, and discovering Indians telling me with sign language and impatient gestures that they were imprisoned for centuries. There was nothing I could do to liberate them, and cold sweat awoke me. I know by experience by now that no subject matter after a while remains just a subject matter, but becomes a matter of life and death, our sanity resolved by visual means. Sanity, our power of perception kept focused. It is an open-ended endeavor. Through the long night of the species we go on, somehow blindly, and we give a name to our need for a breakthrough. We call it angel, or call it art, or call it mountain." Thank you.